These are the richest black families in Baltimore, and their come-up stories are absolutely insane. We're talking about a woman who got rejected by 32 banks and still ended up as a millionaire, a quarterback who fired his agents and let his mom negotiate the richest deal in NFL history, and a paperboy who built the first black-owned billion-dollar empire on Wall Street. Let's get into this crazy countdown. Number 8. The Jackson Dynasty. Let's kick off with a name every football fan on the planet already knows, because Lamar Jackson didn't just get rich, he rewrote the rules on the way there. Baltimore first fell in love with him back in 2018 when the Ravens grabbed him as the very last pick of the first round, a spot that basically said nobody was sure he'd make it. Fast forward a few years, and he'd become the beating heart of the entire franchise, a two-time MVP with a playing style so electric that defenders look like they're chasing a ghost. Now here's where the money story gets wild. In May of 2023, Jackson signed a 5-year contract extension worth $260 million, which made him the highest-paid player in the entire history of the NFL at $52 million a year. But that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part is how he got it. Lamar Jackson walked into the biggest negotiation of his life with no agent at all. He represented himself, leaning on the one advisor he trusted more than any suit in the business, his own mother, Felicia Jones. Think about the guts that takes. Every expert in the sport told him he was making a huge mistake, that you don't go up against a billion-dollar franchise without a professional in your corner. The agencies pushed back hard, and Lamar just quietly let his mom, the same woman who'd been his trainer and his business brain since his childhood back in Pompano Beach, sit across that table and hammer out a record-shattering deal. The doubters got their answer in 9 figures. Off the field, his fortune is just as grounded. He paid $900,000 in straight cash for his estate in Owings Mills, a place now worth well over $1 million. And he later added a $5 million spot in the Pacific Palisades with ocean views for days. He runs his own publishing company and a music label, and he still shares that Baltimore mansion with his mom, his partner, and his young daughter. The man kept his circle tight and it paid off. Now Lamar built his fortune by trusting family with the money. Our next man built his by managing everyone else's, and he came from a place so poor, it makes even the toughest come-up stories look soft. Number 7. The Brown Dynasty. Number 7 is the Brown family, and to understand just how far Eddie Brown climbed, you have to start at the bottom, because there really isn't a lower bottom than where he began. Eddie was born to a 13-year-old single mother in the rural, segregated Florida of the 1940s, and he was raised by his grandparents in a little house that had no indoor plumbing and no electricity. No lights, no running water, in the deep Jim Crow South. And yet his grandmother did something small and brilliant. She would take him into town just to watch the men walking around in nice suits, quietly planting the idea that one day, that could be him too. That idea took root and never let go. Eddie earned his degree and his MBA from Howard, sharpened his teeth at IBM, and then became a standout portfolio manager at the legendary firm T. Rowe Price. But he wanted his own thing, so in 1983, he launched Brown Capital Management, which today stands as one of the oldest black-owned financial firms in the entire country, and this was no small shop. Under his steady hand, the firm grew to manage around $4.5 billion after peaking north of $11 billion at its height. The kid with no electricity ended up controlling billions in other people's money. And the way the Browns spend it tells you everything. In 2010, they bought a historic 1889 mansion in Baltimore's Mount Vernon district and spent years painstakingly restoring it into the Ivy Hotel, an ultra-luxury boutique property with heated French limestone floors in the bathrooms, imported Italian sheets, and a bistro that draws the city's elite. Married since 1962, Eddie and Sylvia say they've never once thought in terms of his money and her money. It's all just theirs. But here's the genius move. The couple has given away more than $39 million to schools, libraries, and museums across Baltimore, and they structure almost all of it as matching grants. Which means they don't just donate, they force other wealthy people to open their wallets too, quietly multiplying every dollar they give. That is a money mind at work even in charity. Now Eddie grew his fortune inside the stock market. Our next man built his in the least glamorous way you could possibly imagine, one package at a time, behind the wheel of a delivery truck. Speaking of the kind of thinking that multiplies every dollar it touches, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called the Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time, and the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the man who proved a delivery truck can outrun a stock portfolio. Number 6. The Tyler Dynasty. Number 6 is the Tyler Dynasty, and this might be the most quietly inspiring story on the whole list. Calvin Tyler and his wife Tina were born and raised in working-class Baltimore, and back in 1961, Calvin enrolled at Morgan State to study engineering with big dreams. But just 2 years in, the money ran out, and he was forced to drop out of college. For a lot of people, that's a dream deferred forever. For Calvin, it was just a detour. He took a job as a delivery driver at UPS, coming on as one of the very first 10 black drivers the company hired in Baltimore. And here's the part people miss. He didn't just collect a paycheck, he collected company stock, and then he did the hardest thing in all of investing. He held it. For decades. Over a 35-year career, Calvin climbed all the way from the back of a delivery truck to senior vice president of operations and a seat on the UPS board of directors, and that patiently compounded equity grew into a fortune worth well over $100 million. A man who started by dropping off packages became a 9-figure shareholder just by staying the course. And what he chose to do with that money is where the story really lands. Remember, the single most painful moment of Calvin's young life was being forced out of college because he couldn't afford it. So he made it his mission to make sure no other kid from Baltimore would have to feel that. He and Tina returned to Morgan State as the biggest donors in the university's entire history. And in 2021, they committed $20 million to their scholarship fund, the largest gift ever given to the school and one of the largest an alumnus has ever handed to any historically black college in America. There's even an $81 million building on campus that carries their name. The Tylers live a low-key life out in Las Vegas now, far from the spotlight, and their scholarships are fully need-based, aimed squarely at helping Baltimore kids graduate without drowning in debt. The very thing that broke his dream became the thing he spends his fortune fixing for everybody else. Now, Calvin made his money quietly, staying out of every spotlight. Our next man did the exact opposite, building his fortune in the single loudest room in the entire city, the courtroom. Number 5. The Murphy Dynasty. Number 5 is the Murphy Dynasty, and Billy Murphy is exactly the kind of larger-than-life character you'd want telling your story to a jury. He grew up in Baltimore's Cherry Hill neighborhood, and get this, before he ever touched a law book, he went to MIT and earned a degree in electrical engineering, where he reportedly minored in something called propaganda theory. Just sit with that for a second. The man literally studied the art of persuasion in college, and then spent the next 50 years using it to win over juries. That's not a coincidence, that's a superpower. After MIT, he got his law degree, briefly served as a Baltimore Circuit Court judge, and then walked away from the bench to build Murphy, Falcon & Murphy into one of the most profitable black-owned law firms in the United States. And the verdicts this man has pulled off are genuinely staggering. We're talking a $267 million jury verdict against a major bank, a $185 million settlement against the accounting giant Ernst & Young, and a $90 million class action win against Facebook. When Billy Murphy walks into a courtroom, corporations start sweating, and his personal fortune, sitting somewhere between $50 and $75 million, reflects exactly how good he is at what he does. But his most important case wasn't about money at all. When Freddie Gray died in Baltimore police custody in 2015, an event that shook the entire nation, it was Billy Murphy who stood with the family and secured a $6.4 million settlement from the city. It cemented his reputation not just as a brilliant lawyer, but as a fierce advocate for his community in its hardest moments. And this is a true family dynasty, because Billy is carrying a torch his own father lit. His dad founded the original firm all the way back in 1948 to represent poor residents of the Cherry Hill projects, and went on to become one of Maryland's first black judges. Today, Billy runs the firm alongside his own son, Hassan, keeping the legacy rolling into a third generation. Now Billy does his fighting with words, in front of a judge. Our next man does his fighting the old-fashioned way with his fists, in front of the entire world. Number 4. The Davis Dynasty. Number 4 is the Davis Dynasty, headlined by one of the most explosive punchers in all of boxing, Gervonta "Tank" Davis. And this is a pure Baltimore story because Tank came up in West Baltimore, learning the sweet science at the Upton Boxing Center under his longtime coach. He didn't come from money, he came from grit, and he turned that grit into an undefeated professional record and a personal fortune of around $45 million. So how does a lightweight boxer stack that kind of money? Simple. He became box office gold. In April of 2023, Tank stepped into the ring against fellow star Ryan Garcia in a fight so hyped that it generated over $100 million in revenue and sold more than 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. For that single night of work, Davis locked in a guaranteed purse of $10 million, plus a 50-50 split of all that pay-per-view money pouring in. One fight, generational money. That's the modern boxing business when you're the main attraction, and Tank has made himself exactly that. His lifestyle matches the paydays, and he wears it loud and proud. His real estate is anchored by a $3.4 million luxury penthouse at Silo Point, right on Baltimore's waterfront, and he's kept a mansion down in Florida as well. His garage has featured a Lamborghini Urus and a rotation of custom sports cars, the kind of collection that turns heads at every red light. For a kid who came up in one of the toughest parts of the city, the harbor views and the horsepower are a long way from where he started. Now his life outside the ropes hasn't always gone smoothly, and he's had a few well-publicized run-ins with the law over the years. But inside the ring, the man remains one of the most feared finishers in the sport, carrying enough power in his hands to end a night with a single shot and enough star power to fill an arena whenever he fights. Now Tank scores his knockouts in the ring. Our next man spent his whole career scoring them on the charts. Number 3. The Lyles Dynasty. Number 3 is the Lyles Dynasty, and Kevin Lyles has one of the most fascinating origin stories in the entire music business. Born and raised in Baltimore, he was such a sharp student that he actually earned a NASA electrical engineering scholarship to Morgan State. Picture that, a future rocket scientist. But the pull of music was just too strong, and here's the jaw-dropper. Back in 1986, a young Kevin Lyles helped write a song called "Girl You Know It's True" for a local Baltimore crew. That very song later got picked up and turned into one of the biggest global pop smashes of the decade by a little group named Milli Vanilli. Yeah, that Milli Vanilli. We all know how their story ended, but the song itself was a monster, and Lyles had his fingerprints on it from the very beginning. That was just the opening act. Kevin walked into Def Jam Recordings in 1992 as a lowly intern, and through sheer hustle, he climbed all the way to the top, becoming president of the entire label by 1998. From there, he jumped to a major executive role at Warner Music, and then in 2012 he co-founded his own company, 300 Entertainment. That bet paid off in a massive way, because Warner eventually bought the company back in a landmark deal worth $400 million. Not bad for a kid who traded a NASA scholarship for a record deal. Today, Kevin Lyles sits on an estimated net worth of around $60 million, and he lives the kind of high-profile life you'd expect from a music mogul. His wife, Erica, runs her own cosmetics brand. The couple are fixtures on the elite entertainment circuit, and they move through the same rooms as the biggest names in the industry. But for all the glamour, Lyles never forgot the city that made him, running a foundation dedicated to giving back to a better Baltimore. Now Kevin built a powerhouse in the music world. Our next name built something even bigger in media. An empire so massive, it made her the second richest black woman in the entire country. Number 2. The Hughes Dynasty. Number 2 is the Hughes Dynasty, and Cathy Hughes might just have the most inspiring rags to empire story of anyone on this entire list. Before she was a media titan, she was a teenage mother, pregnant at just 16 and even displaced from her family home for a time. Nobody looking at her then would have bet on what came next. But Cathy had a vision for what black radio could be, and she chased it with everything she had, even inventing a smooth late-night format called The Quiet Storm that stations still copy to this day. Here's the moment that defines her, though. Back in 1980, Kathy wanted to buy her own radio station, WOLAM, and she needed a loan to do it. She got turned down by 32 different bankers. 32. Most humans quit somewhere around rejection number 3. She kept knocking until someone finally said yes, and then, to keep the dream alive, she sold her own house and her car and physically moved into the radio station with her young son, sleeping there so she could pour every last dollar into the business. That is a level of belief most people will never understand. That station became Radio 1, which grew into Urban 1, and today it is the largest Black-owned multimedia conglomerate in America, controlling around 70 radio stations across 9 major markets plus the cable network TV1. When the company went public in 1999, Kathy Hughes made history as the first Black woman to ever chair a publicly traded company on a major U.S. stock exchange. And she and her son Alfred, a sharp Wharton MBA who now runs the operation as CEO, kept an iron grip on the whole thing, holding 90% of the voting power. Kathy is now recognized as the second wealthiest Black woman in the entire country, trailing only Oprah, and she commands up to $100,000 just to give a single speech. She lives on a waterfront estate outside Baltimore, and there's literally a plaza downtown named in her honor. From sleeping in a radio studio to a downtown named after her, that's about as complete a journey as it gets. Now Kathy sits near the very top of Black media. But our number 1 built the blueprint that every single family on this list is still following today. Number 1. The Lewis Dynasty. Number 1 is the Lewis Dynasty, and if you've never heard the name Reginald F. Lewis, that's about to change because this man was a straight-up Wall Street legend who did something nobody had ever done before. Reginald grew up in a working-class corner of East Baltimore, and even as a kid you could see the hustle in him. He built himself a paper route with 100 loyal customers for the local Black newspaper, then starred as an athlete at Dunbar High, before eventually earning his way into Harvard Law School. A paperboy from East Baltimore, sitting in the most prestigious law classrooms in the world. But here's the move that made him a legend. In 1987, Reginald Lewis orchestrated a massive leveraged buyout of the food company TLC Beatrice International for $985 million, just shy of a full billion. And in doing so, he created the first Black-owned business in American history to pull in over $1 billion in annual sales. Let that land for a second. In an era when Black executives were rare on Wall Street, this man from Baltimore built a billion-dollar empire and put his name in the record books. By 1993, Forbes pegged his personal fortune at $400 million. And he lived every inch of that success. Reginald Lewis was the first African American known to own a luxury co-op on Manhattan's ultra-exclusive Fifth Avenue, on top of a summer estate in the Hamptons and a home in Paris. His places were filled with museum-grade sculpture, rare art, and Patek Philippe watches, the finest of everything. He even wrote a memoir with one of the greatest titles of all time, asking flat out why white guys should have all the fun. The man was pure confidence. Tragically, his run was cut far too short when he died suddenly from a brain tumor in 1993, at just 50 years old. But his legacy refused to fade. His widow Loida stepped in and skillfully steered the empire forward, and he raised his daughters to be active stewards of the fortune rather than passive heirs. One of them, Christina, went on to launch the first Black woman-owned multifamily office in the country, managing hundreds of millions and carrying the family's financial genius into a new generation. And the state of Maryland honored him by building a $33 million museum of African American history in downtown Baltimore that bears his name. From a childhood paper route to a name carved onto a museum, Reginald Lewis didn't just get rich, he built the blueprint. And there you have it, the 8 richest Black families in Charm City. So which of these journeys hit you the hardest? The teenage mom who slept in her own station, the driver who never sold his stock, or the paperboy who out-hustled Wall Street? Let me hear it in the comments. Tap that like if this changed how you see the city, and stay tuned with Black Status, because there's always another empire worth breaking down.